Fox 21 Local News presents Let's Talk Mental Health, a primetime panel.
Good evening and welcome to a Fox 21 primetime panel. Let's talk mental health. I'm Scott Kilberry.
I'm Taylor Bishop, and we are Southern Colorado. Ahead of Veterans Day tomorrow, we're discussing our nation's heroes and how serving in the military can affect mental health.
Now, this includes veteran suicide, the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, and how transitioning from military to civilian life can be on veterans.
So I'm Dr. Ashley Johnson. I'm an interventional psychiatrist, and Colorado Recovery Solutions is our clinic where we specialize in treatments that can help break the cycle of treatment-resistant mental health conditions and chronic pain. I'm a veteran and continue to serve currently as an Air Force reservist, as a psychiatrist. And so I've gone through this transition myself, even as far as I served previously 14 years in the on active duty, and when you make that transition, and you've served that long, really, or really, if you 1 year of service, it really ingrains in you this deep identity with just being part of the military, and then the more experiences that you have in the military, such as deployments, your specific career fields, all the work and effort that goes into training in that, and then all of a sudden you're transitioning back into civilian life, you do feel a sense of loss. You also can feel almost as if you're lost a little bit, because there's not a lot of people around you typically who understand what you've been through and how you've been trained, really, and conditioned. And so it can be a very emotionally tumultuous time for someone as they're readjusting to the community and civilian life in general. There's also a sense of pride that's maybe not relatable with a lot of people who haven't been through what you have.
Now, before the break, we talked a little bit about the struggle of transitioning to civilian life, but that is not the only things that veterans have to deal with.
Yeah, once they've established a new life, past memories from time in the military may come back to haunt them. So this brings us to what is post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as PTSD.
Combat exposure, sexual assault, the whole broad spectrum of what can underlie PTSD and form that in someone. Or like we talked about, PTS, it's not necessarily, the D doesn't have to be part of it, which is disorder. So that infers that there's a pretty well established impairment in someone's life that's coming from the traumatic memories. And so I think a great point too that was mentioned earlier is that isolation can really be a key risk factor for someone actually ending their own life, because they become so hopeless, right? And they feel so unsupported. Other key factors in that are worth paying attention to and watching for and speaking up, so that maybe you could take advantage of intervention with these treatments, is insomnia and anxiety. So those are two of the primary risk factors, along with isolation, that can set someone up for being at risk for suicide. And so we want to catch those as early as possible. If it means you have to take a medication to maybe help you sleep, that's okay, because that's going to help us get that person stabilized in many cases. And many times the sleep aids that we can provide individuals who suffer from PTSD can help quiet the nightmares. It can help with quieting down what we call hypervigilance, meaning that they're on edge even through the night, which is a key aspect to PTSD. Is sometimes people are afraid to even go to sleep because they're afraid of what they might experience in nightmares. Or maybe that was the time where they experienced a trauma or abuse, or there's really a million different scenarios of why. But if the person can find, a veteran can find a trained mental health professional, whether it's through the VA or through the community services, through any of these clinics, they can typically find these treatments that are very readily accessible, and mental health professionals are very, typically well versed in what treatments are actually reliable and work and can really improve someone's quality of life. I just wanted to continue to broaden the scope of treatments that were available to people who suffer especially from PTSD. We had excellent training courses for mental health professionals in the military, and so was able to kind of bring that with me as I crossed over back into the civilian life as a psychiatrist as well. And just having all of this experience too, and seeing what treatments really help people recover and transition. Understanding the risk factors for military members was extremely important for me to learn and understand, such as retirement. It's missed a lot in military members, is that when you are, you would think that, nearing retirement is such a joyful time, and it is for most people, but it's also a very frightening time for a lot of people too, because all of a sudden, they've spent in many cases at least 20 years doing what they did in their branch of service, and now they're going to have to find a whole new career at around age 40, and that's not an easy thing to do, and maybe they have a family to support, or maybe they're going through something like divorce because it's been difficult. And so that's where I feel a passion to kind of intervene, as the term interventional psychiatrist suggests, is that when our traditional treatments don't work, that's where we can really help someone stabilize, maybe in their depression, maybe their PTSD.
And with that said, we were talking about the transition. How does that military transition, you kind of touched upon it already, impact those relationships that we might have with family, friends, and in the workplace for that matter?
When you transition, either at retirement or for many different reasons why you're exiting the military from active duty, but in many cases you have a lot more time to think, and maybe there's a lot more quiet time than there used to be. The military is good at keeping you busy and keeping you training and deploying, and you are constantly in need, and then all of a sudden that comes to a screeching halt in many cases. And so let's say you find yourself at home, like Christine mentioned, maybe caring for your children, and that's a brand new skill set that you are now finding yourself having to refine. And so let's take the individuals, the service members who suffer from PTSD. Maybe they had combat exposure. Maybe they were traumatized before they entered the military. And that has followed them through, or maybe was exacerbated through their experiences in the military. Is a very common scenario. And now, let's say again, they're at home. It's more quiet, or maybe they're with children, so it can be stressful too. And the hallmark symptoms of PTSD is that you have flashbacks during the day. Maybe you have nightmares at night. You're always on edge. You're easily startled. That combination doesn't typically go well with children, right? And it can really, in a sense, kind of wear you down emotionally, or exhaust you. And so to where, it wears on your ability to be a good parent or be a good spouse that you would like to be. And so why awareness of that particular condition, or any condition that you may have entered the military into or developed while you were there, such as PTSD, but depression, generalized anxiety, OCD. Much of the time these conditions, they fly under the radar while you're in the military, and then you see an exacerbation once someone leaves too, or right before you leave as well. And so that's why it's a critical time for someone to say, it's okay to go to the VA. It's okay to go to your practitioner still on active duty and say, I think I've been suffering from this, even right before you exit the military, but to definitely follow up with the VA, and they can help assess too and say, you know, maybe this did fly under the radar. Maybe we need to look at it now and get you the treatment that you need now and the help and support.
Here is a list of some organizations who specialize in mental health help.
Now, we will have these resources located on our website, of course, at FOX21news.com.
So we've talked a little bit about how leaving the military, transitioning to civilian life can have an impact on family, but how can PTSD impact families, including how to tell or approach children about the topic?
There's a lot of different situations that are just normal daily activities that for children it would be really helpful for them to understand, like going to a restaurant. So someone with PTSD is typically going to want to avoid crowds in many cases because crowds are unpredictable, right? And so there could be many threats there that the person maybe theoretically cannot plan for. And so they're going to want to avoid that. And so that might mean they can't go out to dinner and they can't be, you know, relaxed with their family at a restaurant, whereas, you know, the next family at the next table, they're laughing, joking, enjoying each other. Well, that's very difficult to do for someone who has PTSD. They oftentimes need to sit with their back to the wall. That's how they feel safest. There's even more complex symptoms that can happen with PTSD, such as dissociation, meaning you can kind of space out, and lose time is a way that we describe that too. Whereas let's say you know, someone's been deployed and now they're home and they're driving down the interstate and they see a bag of trash that got left on the side of the interstate. Well, that can trigger a traumatic memory of, let's say, maybe a bomb went off in Afghanistan or Iraq, and now it has almost entranced them as they drive past this bag on the interstate, and that can form a dissociation. Essentially, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to drive off the road, but they might get 5 minutes down the road and all of a sudden they're passing a new building, and they come to and they say, oh, I just lost 5 minutes of time, and it's their brain basically dissociating out so that it can, in a sense, protect itself. Much like a child does if they experience a traumatic event or maybe abuse. The brain trains itself to basically break off and almost deny that it's happening, in a sense, because then it allows the person to come back to and rejoin their life in almost a normal sense. But that can then eventually become disturbing to the person, is that a lot of people do start to realize, I'm dissociating and I don't want to. It pulls me out of my social setting, and do people notice, you know? And so there's all different forms of symptoms of PTSD and different levels of severity that we work with every day, and welcome people to bring their symptoms to us if they're having trouble dealing with it. I'd just like people to keep in mind how to contact our clinic, and understanding our role is that if you've tried medications like antidepressants, maybe mood stabilizers, the whole gamut, and maybe you're not getting the help that you feel like would be optimal, such as therapy as well, contact our clinic. We're at coresolutions.health. There's a contact form on the website. We are set up to get you immediate access to advanced neuromodulation services such as TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation, ketamine infusion, which is extremely effective for PTSD, and Spravato, which can help your medications work much better. And we are in network with all major insurances, including TRICARE and TriWest and the VA, including UC Health. And any services that aren't covered by insurance, we have deep military and veteran discounts, as well as for mental health professionals.
Half the battle, for sure. Some great information for sure. And thank you so much for joining us for this primetime panel. Let's talk mental health.
And thank you to Springs Behavioral Health, Next Chapter, and Colorado Recovery Solutions for being here to answer these very important questions with us.